Welcome to another episode. Today we're going to be covering the Joker movie, the new thriller that's been out for now approximately a week. It's done over $350 million in the box office. I think it's projected to hit over $450 million by the end of probably Sunday.
It's breaking records all over the place.
Interestingly, Rotten Tomatoes, it's 68% with critics, and 90% with the audience.
And you know, I think the classic critic audience is dying off because we just don't really care what these old farts have to say anymore.
For real, I think that we know what's good. Yeah, strangely enough, or they're taking in an interpretation into the film or bias and determining based off whether it meets their bias on whether or not they think it's good or not.
Exactly, like what Scorsese's comment on true cinema, for instance, and I think that there's like this kind of uppity attitude for some of the classics, if you will.
For sure. So the director was Todd Phillips. The actor was Joaquin Phoenix. And I guess I'll just ask straight up, like, how excited were you about the movie, and did it meet or exceed your expectations?
Don't forget to introduce yourself, man.
Oh, man. First of all, I'm Jeff James.
You gotta buy me dinner first.
So, in case y'all forgot, I'm Jeff James. At Jeff ST James on Instagram. Why don't you let the people know who you are?
My name is Richard Yon. You can find me on Instagram at SwimSharkable. I just got my master's in counseling psychology. We're bringing some creative imagery to this outstanding film, and going to discuss it up, down, and sideways, you know?
For sure. So we'll do like our initial reactions. We'll do a brief movie overview. So to start, just for everybody that knows, this is a spoiler alert. We are going to cover in detail anything and everything we can think of about this movie. After we cover the movie overview, we'll cover some big themes that we thought were interesting, some pivotal moments, and last but not least, interpretations, a potential diagnosis that we might think of, both of us being mental health professionals at this point. We'll give our opinions about it, and then maybe some random thoughts or questions that we might have at the end, and our overall score out of 10 for what we think Joker was, and whether or not we recommend it, and whether or not I guess we think there might be even a sequel. So for starters, like how did you feel in terms of your overall excitement about the movie, and did it meet or exceed your expectations?
Yeah, you know, I kind of went in not really expecting to be blown away because I try and go in with just a very neutral position because I don't want to have my expectations be so high that I'm putting it in a box, expecting something that it was never designed to be. You know, I try and turn off a lot and just absorb and enjoy the movie, and then kind of critic it, do a critical kind of like viewership after the fact, and kind of reflect on what I've witnessed. But I was expecting it to be dark. And we'll get kind of into where the aspects of the darkness, what I thought about that. But yeah, I mean, I had good expectations. I think some were met and some weren't for the most part.
Okay.
How about yourself?
I was excited about the film, but I had no idea where they were going to go with it, how dark it would be. I'm a huge Dark Knight fan.
Love it.
Yeah, I personally think in terms of the superhero comic genre of movies, The Dark Knight is as good as it gets. And I feel like The Dark Knight was so good because you forgot that it was a superhero movie.
Yep.
I think Joker did that as well.
Yeah.
It felt like a movie. It felt like a thriller. I think it's going to be a cult classic. It's just one of those films where I ended up seeing it twice, and not only did it exceed my expectations, but I ended up feeling even better about a number of things that I walked away with after the second viewing. There's very few films I will ever pay to see twice, but in my opinion, Joker was worth it.
Yeah. I could absolutely agree on the fact of that you forget that it's a DC movie or a comic book movie. It was something completely unique all on its own, and it just happened to be that character. And I think in the beginning they said it's going to be a one-off. The director was talking about it's like a one-off, like they're just doing this to do this and do something really special. I think they did a really incredible job, and it didn't. It was never designed to replace anything.
Nope.
It was designed to just be kind of its own little masterpiece, which I think was really great. Yeah, really great. So I think it complemented. It complemented the universe really well.
At some point, I guess it will come up about us comparing the different Jokers. Obviously, with Joaquin Phoenix version and Heath Ledger. When you contrast the two Jokers, did either of them kind of stand up more than the other, or do you think that for what they were meant to do, each actor did their job?
Yeah, I would think I would go with the latter. I would say that I'm partial to Heath Ledger's Joker. I think it was just so refined. It's a character I could watch all day. I mean, he's just so interesting, and there's so much depth and chaos and just like darkness and things. And I just love his little quirks when he would speak, like, the little he ha ha, and just
lick his lips.
Yeah. And I know that, I forgot who played the butler, the actor, it's slipping my mind at the moment, but I know that the first scene that he experienced with Heath Ledger as the Joker was in the high rise in the penthouse when he crashed the party. And it was so intense that he completely forgot his lines.
Yes.
Yeah. and like needed a break.
Yes.
Before continuing. And so, I mean, I think that says a lot. I think Joaquin's Joker, like, ironically, even though they're supposed to be separate and standalone, I almost see like the creation of the Joker and what you would see, if you think about the timeline of how Batman was created, essentially his origin story began in this movie. If you think about him growing up and becoming Batman, that amount of time, whatever that is, 10, 20, well, he's pretty young, so I would say around maybe 20 years, give or take. Don't judge me on it, but like, say 20 years to become true Batman, maybe even longer. That's enough time for that Joker to develop into what Heath Ledger, that full, just fleshed out person.
Yes. Like, and I would say the same thing. I think that they were designed to be two different types of Jokers. One was designed to be the person that we eventually saw become, turn into, and grow to what we now know as Joker. And the other person was a fully matured, fully given into, I think, his carnality and his evilness. What I would say is a prime Joker. And I think that they both did it masterfully. I probably in the same boat. Heath definitely stood out to me, but I liked how Joaquin was able to do something that I don't know if any other person who's played Joker was able to do, which was humanize Joker. And we actually understood how he got to that point and turned into what he became. But I'll do a brief movie overview.
Okay. And I will say this too. In the past, I think the Joker's been very cartoonized.
Yeah.
And even the past ones, whereas I think Ledger brought it into this darkness and was human, but we see Joaquin go through this journey and become this person. It wasn't a vat of acid. It was thrown to society, but in a realistic reflection of what it is actually going on now that media doesn't cover. People try to throw under the carpet because it's too uncomfortable. And this truly shows a representation of that should make us uncomfortable, and just because it's actually happening.
Sure. So in terms of like the movie overview, I'll go through it real quick, and then we'll jump into some themes, and we'll go from there. So for those who haven't seen the film, or even for those who have but are trying to remember just how it kind of started, Arthur Fleck, who is like the main character, who was the guy who eventually would become Joker, he starts off the opening scene where he's kind of applying clown makeup, and we find out that he's kind of like a clown who's hired by a store that's going out of business to just hold up a going out of business sign. He ends up getting jumped and attacked, and the sign gets destroyed. And when he makes it back to his boss ends up threatening his job security. And we start to kind of realize even early on at the very beginning, when the movie first opens, Arthur is almost trying to pull his mouth, his smile as wide as possible, almost to the point of tears. And it was almost like he was forcing himself to smile, which was interesting when contrasting what his life was and kind of looks like throughout the film, which was actually pretty depressing and sad. When we get to about the midway point in the story, we start learning a lot more about not only his life living with his mom and helping her with her physical deteriorating health, but also the state of the city of Gotham, the conditions, which is poor, it's dark. There's even an infamous thing about there being giant super rats running around, trash everywhere. Mental health services are kind of in disarray. Across the board, it's just a really crappy place, I guess, for the average person in the 1980s to grow up. As authors kind of going through the phases of trying to live a life as a guy that's kind of living in obscurity, as a rent-a-clown to work outside of the store, he ends up getting a gun from a friend. And the friend said, listen, man, you need to protect yourself. And Arthur, takes the gun with him wherever he goes to every job. Unfortunately, when he goes into a children's hospital, the gun actually falls out and falls on the floor. He puts his finger up to tell the kids not to say anything.
Don't worry, it was part of the act.
But
those bubbles.
We know that, unfortunately, and that was a huge scene I noticed that the audience was really laughing at. When he makes it back to his boss is furious.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because the audience I watched it with was in utter shock.
Yeah.
You could hear an audible gasp and cringe.
Well, no, when the gun first came out, everybody gasped.
Oh, yeah.
When he put the finger up to his mouth to tell the kids, everybody was cracking up, right?
Yeah.
His boss ends up firing him. When he gets back home, he finds a letter that his mom was constantly mailing off to a rich billionaire who we later find out is the father of Bruce Wayne, Thomas Wayne, and she was a former employee of the Thomas Wayne Enterprises. He opens the letter, and in the letter, his mom basically tells Thomas Wayne that Arthur is actually his son, and that he is the half-son of Bruce Wayne, who eventually becomes Batman. Arthur eventually goes to kind of confront Thomas Wayne, and Thomas Wayne denies everything, punches him in the face, and flats out tells him, not only is your mother a liar, but she's delusional, and she's been making this all up, and in fact, you're adopted. And she was sent to a crazy house in Arkham Hospital. So, distraught, not really sure what to do about his life, being fired. The father that he thought he potentially never had and he found, turns out that he potentially was not true. He goes and gets her records, and when he looks in the records, he reads and finds basically that his mother was institutionalized at one point, that he was adopted, and that there was a period of time where he was abused and mistreated, and basically at this point, Arthur is kind of starting to lose it. Long story short, he ends up getting on a train one day, and he has a nervous tic, laughter, right? And while he's sitting on the train, these rich, I would say Wall Street bigwigs or young guys are on a train teasing and bullying a young lady, throwing food at her, and Arthur's like laughing on the side, and they get distracted by him and end up starting to point their attention at him, and before you know it, they start grabbing him, throwing him on the floor, and beating the crap out of him. This is one of probably countless times that he's been targeted and bullied his whole life, but this time Arthur snaps. He pulls the gun out and shoots the first two guys in the train. There's one more guy who hops off the train. Arthur chases after him and ends up shooting him. At that point, Arthur goes into a bathroom and he begins to slowly transform into a whole different person who fully embraces finally being able to be who he's always been. No longer repressing the anger and frustration of not being able to fit in, but instead he doesn't try to fit in. Instead, he ends up lashing out. He not only kills the three guys in the subway, but he kills the guy who gave him the gun, who ended up selling them out as a co-worker in his apartment. And while he's been, I think right after that, he ends up going to a talk show where the talk show host the previous week had played a clip of Arthur doing a comedy sketch, which didn't go very well. And he invites Arthur on the show. and Arthur basically confronts the guy who Murray, who ran the Murray late night show, and Arthur shoots him in front of everybody.
And that's after he murders his ex coworker, his mom. Evades the police again.
Yes, like he just
dances down the stairs.
He murders like his murdering spree.
Yeah,
and all in the while these different murders are going on in the society, there's a whole bunch of people that's actually cheering for this murdering rampage because they're liking the idea of all the rich elite people finally paying for all the injustice and harmful inequalities they've been living and going through. Strange as it sounds, at the end, Arthur gets arrested after the shooting. Supposedly during a car accident in the police car, gets pulled out and stands on top of the car and is praised and cheered by a whole gang of supporters and rioters. And then the movie kind of closes with the now Joker being institutionalized in a hospital and killing the aide or caseworker or doctor who he meets at the end. And that's how the movie closes. So, like, what were some themes or things that kind of stood out to you in terms of what you were able to identify in the film?
Themes, geez. So many aspects of the film.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think one that really stands so clearly is the mental health system and the lack of financial support. And, you have these people that truly care, probably going into the mission work, social work, counseling, they're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed sometimes and don't, and then they, especially shown in this, for especially the impoverished area and the low SES social economic statuses, they're overworked, underpaid. Mm-hmm. Funding is getting cut. They have no support structure or system for the workers. So they're fighting the battles. They're digging the trenches. They're doing this hard work, but there's no continuity. Clients are being shuffled all around. So it's just an absolute mess. And in this movie, even one scene that just nailed me. Mm-hmm. And that was so sad is the social worker is, talking to Arthur and basically looking at her notes more or less and just trying to check boxes because that's what she's getting paid for and I'm sure the pressure that she's dealing with. And he's talking about his deep feelings and pains and the fact that he wants to go back to Arkham, which is a nightmare because it feels safer and more comfortable. And then he asks her, "Are you even listening to me?" And she doesn't even really respond or say anything comforting. Mm-hmm. The termination scene was so abrupt. And, he finally is like, well, where am I supposed to get my meds? And there's no plan. There's nothing. No. And, so many people, get concerned of this is genuinely happening in our society now. Mm-hmm. And that's why, there is a homeless population. There is all of these, some of these crimes take place because of a lack of a mental health care support that get people in and actually, instead of shuffling them around or drugging them up, actually takes care of them.
It's not only the mental health aspect of it.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing. The scenes of the darkness, the depravity, the trash, the utter just crap and squalor that people were living in, it was highlighting class inequality because at the same time people was living in that, you had the billionaires going to their private movies dressed in their tuxedos. Like it was like two different worlds in the same space. Systemic economic oppression, and then obviously class revolting in terms of like the riots and stuff like that. Those were all major themes. And what was interesting was the fact that the person who was seen as the face to represent fighting against the oppression, fighting against the class inequality, and fighting against the just unfairness was a person who was the most mentally unstable. And strangely as it was, it seemed like a large percentage of the people in the community had more in common with the guy who had mental health issues that was on 7 different prescription meds than the rich billionaire. They had more in common with the guy wearing a clown mask or clown makeup on a killing spree then they had the rich billionaire aristocrat that was so far removed from them. It was like,
and it's what they represented too.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
They spoke to this primal aspect of our minds, and you know, the Joker, I believe, you know, it's not that he was trying to start a revolution. He was doing his own thing, and people just caught wind of it and took it on their own, created their own monster.
Yes.
They created their own firestorm and continue to build it, and that's that mob mentality, that group mentality, the anonymity of like, you can just do whatever you want because you're behind a mask and everyone else is wearing a mask, just like in that train scene when the police get shot and stabbed and everything and beat, and that whole thing broke out. You have no idea who's who. And
just like V for Vendetta. Same concept where it was like the inequality, and those that were most uninfected had one viewpoint of what was going on, what was wrong, and those who were most impacted had a radically different perspective on life, and they felt that you can't. It's almost like they felt like, well, if we can't vote the oppression away, and we can't negotiate the oppression away, what might we have to do in order to change our situation?
Yeah, one unique thing that I also really noticed in this is Thomas Wayne, Bruce's dad. Now I can't speak for comics, comic books, and other medias, but from most of the movies that I've seen involving Batman, is Thomas was supposed to be like this really caring person, revolutionary, sinking his fortune into improving the city, like in Batman Begins. And in this iteration, he's a jerk. And even when the killings are happening, he's not sympathetic or empathetic at all.
Nope.
He's like, look at this joke. Like, how dare all of you betray me, basically. Like, you have no idea who I am. And actually putting down the society and calling them, basically poor pigs, like in the gutter.
And viewing himself as the Messiah to fix them.
Exactly.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah, rather than being empathetic to their system, he just didn't even care. He's like, we're doing it my way, and he's so far removed.
The main thing I took away was the concept of the same way in the movie where so many people was gravitating to and supporting and seeing the Joker or as a leader, as the viewer, for us, I think that if we really thought about it, what made us so uneasy is that he was revealing aspects of something that's hidden in us. There's a Joker inside of all of us. The things that led him to becoming Joker are things that we also cared about. Number one, he desired and fantasized about someone who had no interest in him. How many of us, how often throughout the course of our lives, has desired and longed for somebody that we can't have and just doesn't want us, right? Number two, he desired and longed to be acknowledged, valued, understood. That's human. Like, that's normal. And then number three, him being frustrated with the inability to force people or control people's perception of how they think and feel about him. How often have we been frustrated at the fact of being misunderstood? When all of those things are shut down on a person, who what they turn into is a Joker. So the reality is that there's almost like a social responsibility for the creation of Jokers everywhere. When we talk about Aurora and all these mass shootings and all this different stuff, what makes us as uneasy is that there's individuals that can do the most heinous and vicious things, where if we actually took apart their lives and saw how they got there, we'd have to recognize that A, we had a role in creating them, and B, that they deserve some sympathy without condoning their actions.
Right.
It's far easier to place people in black and white boxes, good or bad.
Yeah.
Joker makes us, this movie, this character, it makes us uneasy because for 80% of the film, he was likable. He was human. You felt bad for him. And when he converted and went all the way off, all of a sudden, it's this, it's that. No. We see guys like him every day turn into that. In fact, that could be us under the right circumstances. So it just, I thought that as far as what Todd Phillips did, I thought that he did an excellent job, I think, at trying to get the audience to start to think from a social responsibility perspective in terms of looking at things through a class system, looking at it through in terms of mental health and the value we do or don't place in our society, and whether or not we're able to recognize the Joker inside of all of us and inside of one another.
Yeah, and I think you bring up an interesting aspect too. Looking at this, and we were talking about this earlier too, in the counseling profession, we're exposed to people dealing with trauma on an almost daily basis.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're able to compartmentalize some of it and not take it home with us. And then there's other times I went through a case just the other day that it's been 3 days and it's still sticking with me. And that's healthy in some ways because it shows that we're human, and that we truly care. There's an aspect here where what he went through, and that's one issue with the movie, that not that I found it really as a negative, but it was something that I think your average person who doesn't deal in trauma daily or hasn't necessarily experienced trauma or isn't familiar with the experience or aspects of it, this is really dark.
Yeah.
But I think that as dark as it is, and I'm not invalidating what he went through because it was tragic. I think that he was still savable, and I think that between the mental health, society, how many times he went and reached out for help, he was failed.
Yeah.
They failed him. He was, and I think there was a point where he was still savable. And I think after that first murder, self-defense and then murder, because it was, I believe 2 were self-defense. The third one was pretty cold-blooded.
Yeah, when he
in the
got
back.
the train.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The guy's on the stairs. I mean, he was no longer a threat. That's a big no-no in the gun community too. You don't shoot a fleeing person, right? Yeah. That changed things. Then it was that the cat was out of the bag. It was over. One thing I was expecting from the film that I don't think necessarily delivered is such overwhelming trauma and odds within his life that no one could overcome them. That they were so overwhelming that you had to understand that, it only made sense he did that. And I think that's also kind of a beautiful part too, because it says that even someone who hasn't experienced the worst thing you've ever seen in your life is still capable of becoming this. Yeah. We see some of these mass shootings and things of that nature. This person may not have gone through something that was overwhelmingly unable to be overcome, but for that person it was, or they were denied help, or the police failed in figuring it out fast enough, or they knew about it and then they just didn't do what they should have been on the books, or hindsight's 20/20 in a lot of cases too, right? But I was expecting even more heartache for this character. Granted, it was a lot, but I was expecting just a little bit more to have made him snap.
Well, think about it in the context of all the trauma that he went through in the past.
True.
Right? How meaningless his life was leading into the opening of the film, where he's a rent-a-clown that's working for a business that's going out of business. Mm-hmm. Like, where are you gonna be 30 days from now, right?
Yeah. Well, and his perspective was good too.
Well, at the time, and then he constantly gets threatened about losing his job left and right, and then take this, between the bullying, being misunderstood, he gets on a bus to play around with a little kid, and then when the mother turns around and says, "Stop messing with my kid," and he said, "I'm not messing with your child," and she just flips out on him. To when he sees a woman that lives in the same apartment complex, and he knows he'll never have a shot with her, and he has to fantasize about her and other women. This is a guy who's probably never made love to a woman a day in his life. You see it when you open up the notebook, and he has all these naked women everywhere, right?
That was...
He can't be understood by normal societal standards. Well, he can't blend in.
He can be understood by normal societal standards, but all of the places that he was in chose not to.
Okay.
I think he was failed.
Great.
Because I think someone who was truly passionate could have brought him back. Yeah. Someone who really cared, but
when you look at all those different things that happen, the job loss, the mom lying to you about your adoption.
Well, think about him trying to get resources.
The loss of medication, the loss of mental health services, the lack of any meaningful friendships. Like, this was a crazy pot.
And betrayed by someone he kind of deemed a friend, too, with the pistol. Mm-hmm. And also, you know, and a lot of times we forget in society, too, is, you know, we think of, oh, geez, well, you know, how can these people just not help themselves? Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you don't have the resources, you know, you have $20 in your pocket for the week because of, you know, whatever bills you finally were able to pay. Well, that's transportation. That's, you know, am I going to eat an extra meal, or am I going to be able to do anything unexpected to go fill out the paperwork at the place for the insurance, or to find the resource? I don't have a computer. Well, now, granted, this was, you know, this movie takes place, you know, a little bit before all that jazz, but necessarily. But like, just even in today's standards, you know, that $20 is getting just the bus to get to the place, to find out that the form that I have to fill out, I have to do it online, and that's my whole Saturday.
Yeah.
And it's like it's so difficult to rise out of where they're at.
For sure. Let's transition into pivotal moments. I would say you had mentioned it like a few minutes ago. One of the pivotal moment for me that let me know that the author that we knew of, the Arthur Fleck that we knew of throughout the film, was not this. He eventually had a stark shift and change, was when he was in the train, he was getting attacked, and he shoots the first two guys to almost defend himself because he's freaking out. After the first two guys are shot and killed, the third guy runs through the train and runs out, and Arthur chases him. And when the guy's crawling, trying to get up the steps, Arthur guns him down, and now this moves from a guy who's been the victim his whole life to the perpetrator. He goes from the hunted to the hunter, and there's this like light bulb goes off. So at first he freaks out, he runs, he's just scared to death, and then he ends up like in a bathroom, and like he closes the door, and like this music starts, and it's like this peace, this calmness comes over him that perhaps he's never felt or experienced in his whole life. And it's like he's finally becoming true to himself, of what he's always felt and thought. The reality is he's probably always thought really dark, morbid things, and everybody keeps telling him, you can't think that way, that's wrong, that's not funny. And he finally fully embraces it when he shoots that third guy coming off the train. And I was like, I felt like Arthur Fleck died, or was started to die at that moment. Obviously, I think that he fully was done with Arthur Fleck the moment he murdered his mother in the hospital. But we started to see this transition of him moving from the guy who was always kind of, you feel bad for, being taken advantage of, abused, made fun of, to all of a sudden he's like, no, I'm not going to live on these terms anymore. I'm going to live life on my terms. And if that means taking people out, so be it. Whether or not that's a random guy on the street or my own mother. So those are like crazy huge scenes that really help transition this guy's overall character development from just being like a gradual kind of ne'er-do-well that's just trying to make it through, looking for handouts and help, to him basically saying, my laugh is natural. It's not an issue. How I feel about killing people, you think it's bizarre, I think it's normal, and I'm going to embrace it. And you see this like crazy shift and change. So those were like a couple scenes from me and that were I pretty much considered and thought were like pivotal moments.
Yeah, you know, and I would agree with a lot of those moments, especially like him dying to his old self and becoming the Joker. I think the point of transition of killing his mother was the death of Arthur. I absolutely agree. And I think that he became Joker the moment he said, I'm Joker, introduce me as Joker. Mm-hmm. And then he just kind of, I think, fully self-actualized in the chair when he decided to admit to the murders, and then shoot the guy in the head, which I thought was outstandingly great.
Awesome.
Like as dark as that is, I think like sometimes it's just satisfying, because I don't think movies. I actually really enjoy a movie without a happy ending, because life doesn't necessarily have happy endings. It's typically, if it's a happy ending, the story just happened to stop there.
Like, I love John Wick, but this wasn't a John Wick episode.
Right.
This wasn't a full-fledged firefight and people dodging bullets and flips and all this other stuff. It was so raw and realistic. You humiliated someone on national television. You invited them on national television to humiliate them even further.
Yeah.
And instead of him allowing himself to be yet again a victim, he was like, no, I'm done with that. And he just took him out. People are freaking out. And he just drops the gun, walks around, and goes to the camera to start talking. I was like, this dude, this is Joker.
Jimmy Fallon was playing with fire when he was pulling that crap on that interview, man.
Yes.
He was playing with fire. Did he not see what happened to him?
The irony, man. Like, the irony. I'm telling you. It was so bizarre.
You know, and so I really like what you brought up in the arc there, and I want to add to that by saying what I really loved, and I agree with everything you had just said. I really loved the little moments that added up to the big.
Okay.
And so I think one of the first ones that really tickled me was when he was in the hallway and he had a conversation with the woman for the first time. He stepped out of the elevator. You know, in the elevator, she kind of puts the fingers to the head and pulls the trigger, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. And then he does it back to her in humor, but he takes it way too far, and it's like a realistic shot to the head, essentially. And you see how, like, these lack of social cues from the brain damage of the beating when he was little, you know, and the fact that his laugh in the comedy show is always off.
Oh, my goodness. That was such a great moment.
Yeah, and it was uncomfortable. And it was hard to watch because we understand that it was off, but he has not necessarily understanding of that.
Yeah.
I think another one that kind of made me curious was when they went to the apartment and then they just had sex. Like, you know, they kind of phase out of it. You know, they don't show anything, but like, you know, that was so abrupt. It was like there was no flirt. It was just all of a sudden they had one interaction and then now, wow, that's a lot of passion out of nowhere, which we come to find out later that is a throw to Fight Club moment.
Great movie.
Yeah, which if I may do just a small branch of what we're talking about of how I love that they briefly showed all the scenes that didn't actually happen or that they happened but differently than he perceived them.
Yes.
And like, you know, her laughing at the comedy club, the way the comedy club actually went, the relationship that never actually happened, you know, and I think back to a couple movies. Granted, I actually saw The Uninvited with Emily Browning before I saw Fight Club. So that was my mind blow when, you know, someone doesn't exist. It's a fantastic movie, highly recommended. It also reminded me of Sucker Punch as well, another Emily Browning movie, which is escaping reality to the existential level, almost to like a dissociative level of my life is in such misery that not only am I going to fantasize, but I'm going to live it in my mind to a degree that changes the way I live my life.
It gave me Inception vibes.
Yeah.
Right? So the thing that I think was so brilliant about Joker is that Joker is a multiple choice character where you can walk away with multiple different interpretations of how to view him, things that happen or you might think didn't happen, the significance of certain things, and they can all be valid. That's how complex I think this movie was and why maybe some people are so kind of like frustrated about it. Even a couple more pivotal moments. When Arthur looks at the letter, he looks at a photograph of his mother, and on the back he sees a brief note which appears to be written by Thomas Wayne to his mom from years ago. The letters, as far as the initials, appear to look very different than the letters that are on the type of writing letters that she was sending to Thomas Wayne every day or every week or every month. And that makes the viewer wonder if everything Thomas Wayne claimed was true. Is it really that she was all the way crazy? They never had a history? Did they have some type of history and then she went crazy? Or did they have a history and when he rejected her, then she went crazy. Those are all like very compelling potential directions, and it wasn't until the viewer goes from like author finding out, oh, this letter says you're my father. The guy says, I'm not your father. You're actually adopted. Go to the hospital and see for yourself. He finds out and sees all these records. We're just going and tracking along with them. But it's not until we see that photograph with that potential line that says, love your smile or whatever it said with his initials, that we're like, well, who's telling the truth?
Mm-hmm.
Which is actually accurate? Is he actually truly the half brother of Bruce Wayne, who we know is Batman, or is he adopted?
Wouldn't that be just wicked if he was the half brother?
Which might crazily explain why Batman has so much difficulty fighting against him and finally killing him. No matter how many people Joker kills, Batman struggles with just taking them out. He always has this sick,
and he never does,
symbiotic connection with Joker. And although they took artistic liberties in this movie to create that and throw that dynamic out there, I think it actually adds more to the whole history of Batman and Joker having this yin and yang thing where they just seemingly can never finally just be done with one another. Yeah. It could be like they're actually siblings. Like, that would be an awesome thing for me.
And that's why Joker doesn't kill Batman.
Yes.
And he talks about that so much in Dark Knight of like, I just can't get enough. Like, we're never ending. Yes. An immovable object meets an unstoppable force.
Yeah.
And it's like, hanging from that skyscraper upside down. Like,
love it.
Oh, it's so.
And laughing while he's decking them. Like,
it's fantastic. I think that's why I just love Heath Ledger. But and I think Joaquin Phoenix did a phenomenal job. And I like that it was different.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at Jared Leto too. Like, everybody did their own take. Jared Leto, I know,
not feeling it.
No, but I will say he did a lot with really bad writing.
I'll give you that. Yeah. I thought about it today, and I said they tried to turn into a comic book.
Yeah,
the feel, the graphics, the costume designs, the makeup style, even like the flash and flare, the colors, like. Yeah.
I think he did a great job for what he was given.
That's true.
But definitely not, I not even in the same ballpark as these two Jokers.
Agreed.
And I do love Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. I think she's spot on.
In many ways.
Well, yeah. And thank goodness she's going to be in the reboot of Suicide Squad as well.
Probably one of the craziest moments to realize was that from this version of how Joker and Batman were created, they ended up having the creation of Joker and Batman happening on the same night.
Oh yeah, I love that.
With his father being killed on the same night as the riot, and Arthur Fleck calling himself Joker on that same night. Like, that was just.
How old do you think Bruce was in that the alley for this movie?
Probably no more than like 12.
So, like, if we think about the way trauma works, too, right? Mm-hmm. So the guy had a clown mask on. So think about that, too. The younger you are, the less life experience, context, the lesser ability you have to conceptualize concepts, right? Mm. And be abstract. The way that you process what's going on around you, life experience, right? Comparatively. If you're 3, you don't know who Freddy is, right? So you see Freddy and it scares you, and then, the way the brain protects itself is casting a wide net. So when they grow up, they, if it was never, properly taken care of, they might be afraid of long fingernails or, have an aversion to an aspect of Halloween or something of that nature, rather than Freddy himself, right? And so in this moment, this young Bruce Wayne is seeing this clown essentially murder his parents. And could you imagine growing up and then 25 years later now facing the Joker? No wonder why there was such hatred between the both of them. Because Batman became Batman to save, to right a lot of wrongs, save a city. But
that's why this particular Batman / Joker movie although a lot of people didn't like the artistic liberties of where the director went because it wasn't going with the original comics, it actually did a service by explaining their relationship and why they're so connected. And by now having that happen, because in the previous encounters where Thomas Wayne's gotten killed so many times in so many movies,
the only one that's helped him is Ben from Spider-Man.
But it's never been a clown. It was always a guy that was just a robber, robbing them.
Yep.
This time he specifically chose to use a guy who was a robber who was wearing a clown mask. And that, in my opinion, like you said, made their relationship throughout the years make so much more sense about why they have such a toxic connection that just can't seem to be broken. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, man, incredible.
Yeah.
So to kind of skim through, because we're kind of wrapping up.
Yeah, we're wrapping it.
In terms of interpretations,
now to read this line by line the script.
I will kill this part. I thought long and hard about this, and y'all will appreciate what I'm about to say.
What are we killing?
The interpretations.
Well, right. We kind of, yeah.
I would say that one of the main things that. And we talked about
covered a lot of our points.
The main thing that I wanted to say is that I think the viewer has to make a decision, especially those who were frustrated or struggled with this movie, for whatever reason. If you were uneasy, if you were nervous, having anxiety, or even flat out scared, or bothered by certain parts of the movie, I think the challenge that the director was going for was, as the viewer, to look at the irony of what it is that bothered you versus what bothered the upper class in the movie. Those that were considered part of the upper class were most bothered and most upset by the deaths of the rich and famous. The deaths of those that were put in place to protect the elite, meaning the police. The death of the most famous TV national host in the night show at the time, Murray. They were more concerned about those things versus the conditions and the quality of life that the average everyday person in Gotham was living and experiencing. The very start of the movie started with them talking about the quality being so bad that they had a rat infestation, and now they have super rats, right? Yeah. Like filthy buildings, high unemployment, low wages. The most vulnerable people was losing their medication and losing access to good mental health care. Like, violence is crazy. The upper class are living in this bubble, completely unconcerned. The average person like Arthur is just trying to make ends meet and can't hold down a job. And even if they have jobs, they're underpaid and can't, like, it's just a toxic environment for people to try to live and thrive in. And for many people that watch the film, coming out of theater, they're bothered and upset about this or about that. But not one time did I hear them talk about any of those things that people was living in and having to deal with. They were bothered by the shooting scene. They were bothered by the random violence. They were bothered by the darkness of the violence. They were bothered by, like, it's not to say that those things that you were bothered by weren't bad. It's to say, just like the people in the movie, the irony is that the viewer can't recognize the parallels between what's happening in the movie and the people's inability to recognize that this too is evil. This too is wrong. People being poor, not being able to afford their medication, not being able to know when their next meal is coming from, that is evil. That's bad. That's wrong. People not having access to healthcare. Like, we can apply this into our real world life. Like, the point is, Joker became a symbol for those who felt that they were forgotten. And I think that he did a really, really good job. And the thing that I think he was attacked for, meaning the director, Phillips, they felt like he created a film that was trying to usher in and promote or motivate more violence in society. I would argue what he was trying to do was critique and offer not a prescription for what's wrong in society, but an assessment of it. Mm-hmm. He was offering an assessment. He wasn't offering the solution. So that's my argument. I think that in terms of my interpretation, I think that he did an amazing job at being critical of classism, of elitism, of inequality and talking about how these systems kind of feed on those at the bottom until they get to a point to where they want to revolt. And he's not saying that that is the only answer, but what he is saying is that more often than not, this is how people are going to go when they keep getting pushed down. So, in terms of my interpretation, I felt like Joker was a microcosm and representation of what happens when someone is pushed all the way to the bottom of that type of society and left with no supports. Mm-hmm. This is what you get.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that one of the major beauties of this movie is that the viewer is actually an active participant.
Yes.
Whether they realize it or not. And I think that, societal media focuses on the shootings, the major things going on. They're not focused on the everyday, every person. They're focused on these mass things where they want to shift our attention. Whoever's choosing what we focus on, I'm not going to comment on. But, I think that we're so used to focusing on the gun violence, for example, rather than the person behind the gun, how they got there. Yep. This gun wasn't legal. This gun wasn't acquired. There were no background checks. There were none of those law-abiding citizen aspects. He had no training. He was carrying it illegally. Why did he feel
that he needed the gun?
Exactly. And there's so many aspects here too, like, of criminality, that, so as an active participant, you're subtly, without realizing it necessarily, may not realize of all that's actually taking place throughout the movie is priming you for those active moments of the shootings, of the really horrible things that took place, by all of the subliminal things that were taking place all along, that we as a society often overlook. Or haven't been illuminated to because media isn't focused on that. If media turned around and said, hey, oh my gosh, look at this homeless shelter that's going out because of lack of funding, et cetera, and that was blasted all over the place, something different would happen.
It's when you look back at Joker, especially for those of you who did see it one or two times, did you realize that all the poverty, the darkness, the rats, the dirtiness, the squalor that people was living in, that was viewed as the background.
Right.
That was viewed as the backdrop.
And that was the star of the show.
And that was the main point of what he was trying to get at.
Yep.
Like, you killed it. Like, that's it. Yeah. I think that I'm telling you, like, and if that was his aim, or even if by accident, he nailed it. He nailed it because the average viewer, included, I didn't realize that till the second time I watched it. And I was like, why was I more shocked or moved or bothered by this versus something that I see every day?
Yeah, and one thing cinematically I really liked was the dynamic range of the sound of the movie, in the regard of, I don't think it had the best score of any movie, although I would say toward the end I loved some of the music choices, especially in the end in the police car when he was driving away. I love
him standing up on the police car,
right?
With his hands out raised.
Yeah, and there was a brief moment, I can't remember exactly where it was in the movie, but it was towards the back half, where we got just a touch of that suspenseful sound that was in The Dark Knight in the very beginning. Anytime there was a build up to seeing the Joker, we got like a little whiff of that, which I really enjoyed.
I thought it was, I could be wrong, but I thought it was when he was on the, I thought it maybe we're talking about two different parts, but there was a scene when he was sitting on the stage, and when him and the host were going back and forth, and the music starts to shift and gets more and more tense. Yeah, I was like, man,
but this was more of a that, and then there's one, like, it's just a sound effect. Okay, so like in the very beginning of Dark Knight, when it's building up and the camera is panning up the Joker before the van's tires screeching interrupted it. It was like this very suspenseful noise. And I caught a little whiff of it here or there in the movie, which was phenomenal. But I will say, in regards of the dynamic sound, I'm a big home theater guy, and I've projector and speakers and all that good stuff. Like, I love the sound. I think it's 50% of the movie. Because it can tell you so much and shift your emotions, and is the storyteller in so many ways as well as the visuals. I will say that the sound of the gunshot of a .38 caliber
in
like that
the studio.
Yes. Well, anytime you use it.
Okay.
It was so visceral.
Yes.
Because in real life, a gunshot is deafening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we watch all these crazy movies where, you know, Bruce Willis is like shooting machine guns and doing all that stuff. Funny enough, and actually, I believe it was the first Die Hard, he actually lost partial hearing because he shot a gun in an elevator scene and his earpiece wasn't properly secured. That's just to give you an idea. And those were, I believe, blanks, and you know, obviously, using it in there, which is, you know, a lesser charge and all that. But just to give you an idea, like a gunshot is deafening. I mean, ear shattering, especially inside. Mm-hmm. A .38 caliber is no different. That's getting up there, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a greater sound than a 9mm, even, for example, right? And so I love it in a theater when it's just loud. Yep. Shutter Island, when at the very end with Leonardo DiCaprio, not to spoil too much, but when he fires the gun, it was so incredibly shocking and loud. It just it was separate from everything else. Mm-hmm. In this movie, when he shot the gun, it was separate from the movie in a way because it was so loud. It just broke out from the context.
The first time he shot it.
Yes. It changed everything.
It was so different from the whole other half of the movie.
Exactly. It revolutionized the movie into a whole other animal, if you will. And and that's where I think audio and that dynamic range, you know, loud to quiet, that kind of thing, is so pivotal. And I'm glad they made the choice to make the gunshots really loud.
Yeah.
And startling.
Yeah.
Because a lot of movies will downplay it. Oh, you know, the gun's going off all the time and whatever. Mm-hmm. This was, you know, a couple shots and it's just like, oh my goodness. And
the funny thing is the irony of how much people freaked out about the violence.
Yeah.
When contrast this to John Wick.
Yeah. Oh, great.
We had 2 hours of gunshots, right?
Yeah.
This gun was probably shot.
Now, let's be fair.
6 times?
Let's not give guns. There were a lot of knife play, too.
Yeah. But, like, the gun was probably shot legitimately, like, 6 times in terms of...
in this movie? Yeah. Well, he went through the entire...
he shot the TV host twice.
Yes, once. Oh, was it 2 or 3 times? He shot him in the head, and then I think he shot him twice in the chest. Maybe. But he shot 6 times. He shot
the train scene.
Yeah, and granted, I've seen this once, but I almost want to say they miscounted the amount of shots, and I think it was over 6.
The train.
Yeah,
because he did shoot like a bunch of times inside. Yeah.
So I believe they went over. They overcounted. I could be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure.
Nitpicky.
Yeah, but it's okay. But as a gun person, like, and when I say that, you know, don't write me. I don't care about what you think about guns. Look at Colin Noor and yell at him. He's a great guy. Just check him out. Anyway, so Noir. Anyway, so but what I will say is I loved the realism of that, and I'm partial to revolvers, .38 revolvers anyway. So I don't know. It was unique. It's a very like just simplistic. Just he didn't know what he was doing. He just
no machine gun, no bombs. Like it was very simple.
It was simple. Yeah. It was simple. And just the fact that it was a gun, it was a gun. You know, in Heath Ledger's Joker, it was very much knives too.
Yeah,
very much knives. And he even talks about. Yeah, I love it. And
great scene.
Pencil, right? But what I liked about, you know, even in the Joker, he's like, "Do you know why I use a knife? Because I wanna find them in that last moment." You know, so it really doesn't matter the implement of tool you're using; it's the person behind that tool and that's using it, right? And but I just thought it was just very poetic the ways that he did it. The dancing down the stairs, he was coming into his own. He was finally feeling free.
What to say? Diagnosis. Now with your shortened years of...
I would say FUBAR would be a good diagnosis.
I looked up a lot of stuff online, and a lot of people was arguing back and forth about schizophrenia.
Yeah. And some of the delusions could point to that. But
sure.
but I mean, some of the clarity and the conciseness kind of rule out some of the schizophrenia, especially in the higher times, because the delusions were hallucinogenic. They were hallucinations, right? But he. It's not like he was thinking he was a race car driver and then an astronaut. And, if you ever spoken with a schizophrenic through a hardcore episode, they're whatever they want to be. And they'll give you a story that'll, write a bestseller. But like,
I think he just was a person whose PTSD, when finally unmedicated for a sustained period of time, got the best of him. When I went through the DSM and looked at the PTSD, requirements, experienced, witnessed, or occurred violence, death, or serious injury. Well, he did repeated exposure. In terms of intrusion symptoms, one of the markers is a physiological reaction. Obviously, his nervous tick was like the laughter. And forcing himself to like smile during the most uncomfortable situations, including when his boss was going off of him and saying like he's going to fire you. Like he
often laughed in the opposite of a time to laugh.
Avoidance.
When he was sad, he was crying and laughing.
Yes. What was it? Cognitions and mood symptoms. Inability to remember trauma. Remember, they didn't say that he was like a 2 or 3 year old when this happened. They just said he was a young child, and yet he couldn't. Until he read it on paper, he couldn't remember or visualize himself being tied to that radiator. Like he just blocked it out of his head, and that is a cognition symptom of people who go through PTSD. Their ability to block out the most painful aspects of their lives, mentally block it out.
And granted, this isn't for every case, but it is a possibility. 100%. It's definitely
what was it?
Potential symptom.
Persistent negative view of self. He said to the caseworker, "I've never been happy." I've never been happy a single, either to himself or to his mother. I've never been happy a single day in my life. Right. And then he said something, and then it was arousal and reactivity symptoms. You only need 2: angry outbursts, reckless behavior, or destructive behavior. We saw that like crazy. And then
what are you talking about? He was a model citizen.
Right. So in my argument, listen, he might meet. Obviously, I'm not a mental health expert, but PTSD's got to be there. And that's why I think like when we look at people who have gone through trauma, and when they're left with being able to cope and deal with it on their own, when life continues to go downhill or something bad happens to a person who's already gone through trauma, crazy things might happen after that.
Yeah.
I know it in my own life, so
tell me about it, man. If I may add to that, I look at it too in regards. So he has a traumatic brain injury, which contributes to the laughter aspect, the social deficits. So it also seems to be that he has a processing deficit as well, which can be affect a variety of different elements, whether it be learning, social cues, his ability to even understand sarcasm or joking, his communication skills. And then you combine that with PTSD. So his post-traumatic, it's getting late, man. Post-traumatic stress disorder. You combine it with that, and you get a really complex diagnosis, right? Which is essentially the brain not able to fully compartmentalize or process the emotion attached with a situation that was beyond their ability to understand it. And you bring that in with a processing deficit and whatever other brain injury is taking place, and you have a recipe that is very challenging to reconcile that PTSD. Then he has no family support. He's caring for his mother, who has her own issues.
No friends.
No true friends who have his back. And also a mental health care system that just dumped him. and he really needed a specialized care in order to take care of it. I believe it was treatable if he had had the specialized care. I would say it would take a very long time to heal.
And a group.
But and social supports, proper living conditions, proper eating. You look at sleep, eating, exercise alone.
Remember how he physically looked throughout it.
And Joaquin Phoenix, he lost
50 pounds?
I think it was around 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
He looked
because a lot of people talked about that, and I believe in an interview we talked about that it was not nearly as much as people had originally anticipated. A lot of it was angles of the way he utilized his body. If you notice his shoulders, he would constantly be doing that or pronouncing his rib cage to give that aspect of lost weight. But I think he did a great job. Should we move on to
to finish out
random questions, thoughts? So overall, I think that Joaquin Phoenix did a phenomenal job. There's a lot of Oscar buzz and things.
As it should be.
Yeah, but what I am going to say, though, is if Robert Downey Jr. is up against him, I'm going to go with Robert Downey Jr. for the Oscar.
For Iron Man?
Yeah, because he lost in 2008 against Heath Ledger. Same situation for the original Iron Man.
History repeats itself, bro.
Right? And that would be the second time he loses against the Joker. But I would say that was the beginning of who Iron Man was. And now we look at how many films, 23 films. And around how many years is it? 11 years, something like that, 12 years. Yeah. And, you look at that cumulative work and you say, man, Robert, he just did a phenomenal job.
Man, I have an easy question to that, or retort to that. Is what he did in that singular scene, because there's nothing else that we're pointing to in the Avengers film that we're pointing to in terms of being Oscar worthy. It was specifically the last scene of him dying, and with that, what it represented,
right?
Versus the entire performance from beginning to end of this movie for Joker. That's going to be the issue that Oscar voters are going to have to choose between. Is that scene more powerful than the transformative thing that Joaquin did throughout?
Well, I think that if they were on separate years, I would say Joaquin should win 100%.
Okay.
What I'm saying is I think that this is the most likely last opportunity for RDJ to win an Oscar for his work as Iron Man, which...
He should have won it for sure, but...
Yeah, he should have won at some point, right? Yeah. And... I think that would be the real nice end cap for a career that they took a risk on him in 2008 and 2007, 2008, and which created something that is amazing. And I think that should be recognized as well. Though, if you're talking about singular movies, I think there's an argument there too. But I'm just looking at all the history. And you look at Leonardo.
This came out later.
Yeah, and you look at Leonardo and how long it took him to win, right? And
we view that as an injustice.
Right, exactly.
So why should we...
I think he should have won for Wolf of Wall Street. He was
Wolf
so
of Wall Street.
It was unreal.
Inception.
Yeah. Wolf of Wall Street was just... That was
it was
he became that character.
There were so many films,
and then he went for Reverend, which it was it was a fine movie, but
it's not in his top 5 movies.
No, not even close.
I'm just annoyed.
Not even So what would you rate this movie out of 10? 1 out of 10. 10 being it's the unicorn.
All right, if I said that Dark Knight
was a 10.
If I said Dark Knight was a 10. And Logan is an 8.5.
Interesting. Okay.
Then
Man Crush Mondays.
Joker would be a 9.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'd go with Joker as a 7.5.
Okay.
But I would say for its contribution to the universe of DC, I would bump it up to an 8.
Okay.
But as a standalone movie, I think it was phenomenal for a lot of reasons. But I think cinematically, And the score, I think, could have been better.
Definitely.
And so for that reason, I would say that 7.5. I think the acting was out of this world.
Acting 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Do you think that this was a case where the actress' performance was better than the script?
Yep.
That's why I can't place it at a 9.5 or 10.
Yeah.
For me. Mm-hmm. But that's the only reasons why.
Yeah.
Because I found that they intentionally tried to make this film dark, which meant not many scores, not much vivid lighting, not much, no CGI, no frills.
I'm sure there's some at some point, but
no I didn't catch any. But
well, I mean, I think some of the blood effects and things of that nature.
Yeah, well, okay, that. But other than that, like, they really tried to strip it down.
Yeah,
and make it raw in terms of what Gotham really, truly was and is. And so in my eyes, if you're going for that, they nailed that.
Yeah.
And that's, for me, why I was okay with the 8.5, potentially 9. And I can never forget how good Logan was. And that's why Logan, for me, is here. Obviously, Dark Knight is the top of the top, and then somewhere in the middle is Joker.
You know what blew my mind about Logan is that there was no CGI in that either. It was just a documentary.
Yes. Yeah. Wait, what about the...
I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'm like, what about that? Yeah, what about... Yeah.
Jeff took that one way too seriously, guys. Oh, my gosh. There was a second Hugh Jackman.
Okay, not only that, but I'm like, wait a minute. All the fight scenes are CGI.
Pretty much like from the opening credits to the end credits of the CGI.
Yeah,
you're out of your mind. Oh my gosh.
So yeah,
documentary.
So
Jesus, oh man.
So that is our review, our long review.
Yeah. 2.5 hours.
Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Hopefully we get to do many more different reviews on different movies. Some that maybe that's newer, maybe some that's old. Feel free to comment, share. Let us know what you liked, and make sure that you subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, share it with people that have seen the movie or interested in watching the movie, and comment what you think. So once again, my name is Jeff James. It's Jeff ST James on Instagram, or Jeff St. James.
And I'm Richard Yon, and Insta is Swim Sharkable. Thanks so much for having me. I hope to come back again and do some more films and things. This was a pleasure to join you.
This was dope. And by the way, do not argue about my interpretation. It's gospel.
Okay. Get off your high horse. Oh, my goodness.
All right, y'all.
I love it.
Day.
See ya.